Sara Nelson became a flight attendant in 1996 at United Airlines. She is serving in her second term as president of the Flight Attendants Association. She first was elected in 2014, and I am so excited to listen to her because right now I feel like I wake up in the morning and I think, did Sara Nelson say something today that's going to put me in a good mood? Because that happens a lot lately, right? Does Sara Nelson put you all in a good mood lately? So one of the things that I love about Sara is that she's involved in this strike program at the AFA called Chaos, which is create havoc around our system, which is a theory of striking that keeps the boss guessing what they're doing next. And I feel like that is what we need in the entire country right now. A lot more Sara Nelsons and a lot more first responders in the aviation industry, and a lot more of us figuring out how to create havoc around our system. And famously, Sara said, and says repeatedly, and I hope says over and over for the rest of her life, there are no labor rights without the right to strike. Sara Nelson.
So, my trip to Cleveland is done, getting introduced by the great Jane McAlevey. I'm good. See y'all later. No, thank you so much for having me here, and it's really, really exciting to talk to this room. And I really want to thank Ben Woods from Jobs with Justice for inviting me, and a special shout out to Vonda McDaniel from the CLC of Nashville, and to Zane Farr of CWA for working to make this all happen. Really appreciate it. And my union, the Association of Flight Attendants, with 50,000 members at 20 airlines, some of them flying over us right now, raining down solidarity on this gathering, was first formed to beat back discrimination that ranged from quitting at age 30 or stepping on a weight scale until 1993. And I often like to say that we even fought for men to have the same rights as women on the job. But we were also at the forefront of fighting for LGBTQ rights, and I think that that's particularly important here in June as we celebrate Pride Month. So, taking on these fights is the spirit that led the flight attendants to declare that we wouldn't work flights that facilitated the administration's evil policy of family separations. And it's the spirit that mobilized action against ICE detention of one of our members who was a dreamer and winning her release within 18 hours of coming to our attention. And with access to 360 million voters in our workplace, we intend to continue to use our union for good. So my first week on the job, a 35-year flight attendant pulled me aside after I watched her win a fight with a supervisor in the office over a contractual issue. She said, "Listen, management thinks of us as their wives or their mistresses, and in either case, they hold us in contempt." That was a bit rough for a 23-year-old just out of company training, right? But she went on to say, "Your only place of worth is with your flying partners. And if we stick together, there's nothing we can't accomplish." Now, I want to summon in your mind's eye the faces of all the people who walked the picket line this past year. And picture them. West Virginia's teachers and their mine worker parents and grandparents. Grocery workers in New England, hotel workers taking on the largest hotel chain in the world, Google engineers in San Francisco, and Uber drivers in LA. More working people went on strike this past year than have done so ever in our history. And these strikes were visionary. They built power right there on the picket line. They built the kind of country that we want to be, where we care for each other, where we fight hand in hand for our democracy, where our manyness, our many nationalities, races, and religions, and our diversity of gender and gender identity is a source of pride and strength and love. And we won. We didn't put faith in the perfect savior candidate. We took ownership of our own issues and achieved results. We started in the workplace, and now politics are starting to follow. And we also learned that solidarity is a force stronger than gravity. When I repeat that phrase for a crowd, there's often a pause as people take in the words, followed by some nervous laughter in some places, and outright cheering at the awesomeness of it. And we've seen examples of this all over the country, from Red for Ed teacher strikes promoting public good, to hotel and grocery workers fighting for one job to be enough, and Amazon, Google, Uber, and Lyft workers fighting for respect, decency, human rights, and the ability to organize their union. And since we're celebrating Pride Month, I can't help but think of a moment in my life when I really learned how important it is that we understand someone else's fight. On June 26, 2015, a dear friend walked into my office just a few minutes after the Supreme Court decided marriage equality. And if I'm being honest, I was feeling cynical when he walked in. I wanted to be able to celebrate, but I was in the middle of a fight to prevent furloughs of our members, and we were trying to stop the Obama administration from pushing a trade agreement that would gut millions of jobs, and our streets were filled with protesters demanding answers for the killing of Black youth. I couldn't see how this decision would have an impact on any of that. But my friend was standing in my office with tears running down his face, and he's not a crier. He said, "I don't have a partner. I don't know that I will ever be married, but that's not what today is about. I didn't realize until today the oppression I've felt my entire life. Today, my country recognizes me and the choices I make in my personal life as the same under the law. The feeling of being acknowledged as equal has moved me more than I ever expected it to." And in those words, I remembered two things that are easy to lose sight of, but we can't forget. One, every step forward makes the next step possible. And two, we cannot ever dismiss the oppression of someone else as their problem. Just this week, I received an email from an AFA member who wrote, "As a transgender person, I am terrified. I'm turning to my union for help." And that call for help came to the right place. Some of the earliest wins for LGBTQ rights happened not in the courtroom or in a legislature, but at the bargaining table. Years before San Francisco started using same-sex marriage licenses, long before Massachusetts became the first state to pass marriage equality, our union negotiated and won domestic partner benefits for every United flight attendant. And in fact, before any municipality passed anti-discrimination ordinances, unions representing all types of workers won anti-discrimination in contracts. Because on the job site, people realized that management could fire a colleague for who they loved. If he could fire a colleague for who he loved, he could sure as hell fire you for what you believed or where you spent your Saturday night, or in the case of flight attendants, just for getting married or having a baby or gaining 10 pounds. As we beat back discriminatory practices through a contract at one airline, another soon followed suit. And just as important, it gave members a sense of power that they had to change their own lives. One contract alone won't change the world, but every step forward makes the next step possible. And some of those members and our union leaders testified in the San Francisco hearings that led to domestic partner benefits and helped set the course to marriage equality. So when my friend came into my office that day, all those years of union activism, fighting for those rights, came flooding back to me. Suddenly, the ruling wasn't a distant thing handed down by the court. It was the natural outcome of years of hard work. We won through solidarity, changing one contract, one workplace, one community at a time. During our contract campaign at United, we ran picket lines for 24 hours at airports around the world. Thousands of flight attendants showed up on only a few days' notice. And one flight attendant reported that she heard a woman stop to watch the picketing with her sons before they went in to catch their flight. She told them, "See, boys, this is what people do when they believe in something. They fight for it." And people are ready to fight. People are waiting for answers, and we have it for them in the labor movement. We need to open our arms wide to all working people and help them join us in building power for all of us. Part of that task is to build a labor movement that speaks for and to today's workforce. Working in jobs that are integrated with miraculous and intrusive and sometimes overpowering technology. And remember, technology will never replace a beating heart. Never fear a robot. Fear of robots is how the rich intend to keep us down. But Uber drivers reminded us that we have power together. And part of our task is to build a labor movement that sees itself truly as a labor movement. Not just a collection of separate unions, but a movement that is big enough, broad enough to lift up everyone who works in America. Because just as no individual worker can stand alone, no individual powerful union, no matter how big, can stand alone either, or can survive long on its own. One of the lessons that we learned so clearly this year is that our work is tied together. As postal workers are fighting to save the People's Post Office, flight attendants joined that fight because we understand that the mail that we carry in the belly of our planes is part of the revenue that makes our jobs possible too. And the mail that we carry to those communities and out of those communities that wouldn't have service without the People's Post Office also creates the demand for us to fly to those communities and have those jobs too. If they can't do their job, we can't do our job. Our work is totally intertwined. We need to share these stories and understand how we're connected. We cannot build a movement with a handful of workers here and there, or a movement that lives off our political skills. We also cannot succumb to the temptation of company unionism, of turning into the employer's outsourced HR solution. We must build a powerful, democratic labor movement built on solidarity and power in the workplace, a labor movement that is ready to work together with business to build our country, but whose core purpose is to make sure that whether business chooses to work with us or not, working people will get our fair share of the wealth we create. And part of that task is to build a labor movement that truly stands for something, a movement with a mission, a movement that embodies the best our country has been and can be, a movement that challenges all of us to be a part of being and showing our better selves. And we can be that movement when we choose to be. In 2017, when the White House abandoned Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, we, the labor movement, did much more than send money. We filled ships with supplies, and we filled a giant plane with skilled union workers who spent 2 weeks saving lives and rebuilding communities in Puerto Rico. We turned the power back on in senior centers, reopened schools. Our union nurses and doctors went to remote villages where the wounded and sick remained untreated and were seen for the first time. The flight attendants were so proud to be a part of the AFL-CIO's Puerto Rico relief mission and to have recruited United Airlines to provide the plane that got our relief workers to San Juan. And the CEO of United Airlines did not pick up my call to request that plane because I'm a flight attendant with a big heart. He picked up the call because I won his respect at the bargaining table and on the picket line. We need a movement to act in that spirit every day, to bring working people together, all working people, to demand that all who work in America have their efforts recognized, their dignity honored, their rights protected, their future fought for as our future. The good news is that every time we fight, we get stronger, and there is no shortage of fights for labor. But it has to start in the workplace. It has to start in real people's everyday lives. If we want to build power for our movement and for working people, start in the workplace and politics will follow. When we start with what people feel and see in their lives, we can build solidarity. It's amazing what solidarity can do in the worksite. People who may be on opposite ends of the political debate can find common ground, and when you ground their fight in the workplace, that's what they do. Just a few months ago, my union went to bat for one of our members, as I referenced as I started to speak. Celine was a DACA recipient and graduate of Texas A&M.
who had arrived in the US at the age of 3 and just begun her dream job as a flight attendant. She was assigned a trip to Monterrey, Mexico, and when she told her supervisor she couldn't fly internationally because of her DACA status, the DACA status that had been altered by this hatred decision from the White House, she was told it was okay to take her trip. She was on probation and afraid to lose her job, so she went. But when she came back, CBP stopped her, turned her over to ICE, and she was put in private detention facility in prison-like conditions for 6 weeks. Only allowed to go outside twice a day, only able to see her husband at 5 minutes' time through several inches of glass. When we learned about her case, our union mobilized and got her released within 18 hours. And the comment that I saw that sticks with me the most during that time was from a conservative member, a Trump voter, she let us all know that many times, who said that she wanted strong immigration laws, but this was too far. Because the fight started in the workplace, because our members understand that in the union, an injury to one is an injury to all, that flight attendant was able to see past her political beliefs to what was right and what was wrong. And now she's someone we can mobilize to fight for a fix to the DREAM Act, and from there, who knows? And always remember, if you start in the workplace, the candidates will follow too. They answer to us. Our unions have long been at the forefront of fights for social justice because we recognize that basic premise that if we're not all equally protected, none of us is protected. For years, we outsourced our power while the bosses were outsourcing our jobs. We spent too much time trying to cut deals with the boss or build favor with politicians and too little time mobilizing and organizing members to fight for what we deserve. People think power is a limited resource, but using power builds power. Once workers get a taste of our power, we will not settle for a bad deal, and we won't stand by while someone else gets screwed either. And that's what happened during the government shutdown. It was a humanitarian crisis with 800,000 federal sisters and brothers who were either locked out of work or forced to come to work without pay due to the shutdown. And another 1 million people doing contract work locked out with no warning. In the private sector, there would have been 60 days notice for a layoff. No worker would go to work without pay in the private sector either. And even in bankruptcy, the first day orders in the court include approval to pay people who are working, because everyone understands that you can't expect someone to come to work without a paycheck. It's only because of our unions we heard the stories of the real people who faced real consequences of being dragged into the longest shutdown in history. The people who gave an oath to this country to do their jobs, but were failed by the people who were put in charge of running our country. They had no money for rent, for childcare, or a tank of gas to get to work. The federal worker stretching insulin through the night and wondering if she will wake up in the morning. The transportation security officer in her 3rd trimester with no certainty for her unborn child. The corrections officer who tried to take his own life because he saw no other way out. The air traffic controller who whispered to his union leader, "I just don't know how long I can hang on." The TSA officer in Orlando who took his life by jumping 8 floors to his death in the middle of the security checkpoint. When 2 million people were locked out of work or being forced to come to work without pay during the government shutdown, and the rest of us were going to work when our workspace was becoming increasingly unsafe, I asked, what is the labor movement waiting for? It was time for us to act with the urgency of a general strike. And calling that out was quite interesting. It was a little bit like chaos. The GOP had no idea what that meant. They knew it didn't sound good. They knew it sounded like workers might get a taste of our power, and that they couldn't have. We ended the shutdown because we nearly toppled the entire stranglehold on our country in helping workers understand the power that we have every single day. Many people wanted federal workers with no right to strike to fix this situation for us. We said, don't put it on the backs of people who are already locked out. What are you willing to do? Flight attendants made clear our rights allowed us to refuse work in unsafe conditions, and we made clear we were going to exercise those rights. We had to define what was at stake and the leverage we had to fix it. Our union has been building power for decades. We don't have to use it often because we showed management years ago we were willing to use it. After Patco and Frank Lorenzo at Eastern and Continental and Icon at TWA, and everyone thinking strike was a dirty word, we created a strategy called chaos, create havoc around our system. Instead of striking every flight, we told the bosses we'd run strikes as surprises. If they didn't know what flights will strike, they can't bring in backups or prepare for it. Maximum impact on management, minimum risk for flight attendants, and we took control of the schedule. All told, crews have walked off just 7 flights in 25 years. But because we did it when we needed to, the executives know we will do it. We keep trying to strike, but they never want to face it since then. When I said flight attendants would put ourselves at risk, and we were prepared, wouldn't put ourselves at risk during this shutdown as conditions became increasingly unsafe, and we were prepared to strike if we needed to, the CEOs knew we meant business. I hear they made sure people on Capitol Hill knew it was a bad idea to try to call our bluff. And they sent me a nasty letter as if that was going to back us off. We started in the workplace, built power in the workplace, and the politics followed. When we used our power, it built power. And people looked at flight attendants differently when we walked into the room. At first, all they wanted to know was, what are the pilots going to do? And we just kept talking about what we were willing to do. And soon, no one talked about anything but what flight attendants were willing to do. And when we walked into those rooms after that, we felt that people had our backs because they knew we had theirs. If you looked at social media during the shutdown, people were screaming from one side and the other. Everyone was pointing fingers. And effectively, Trump's wall was already built online. That's what you'd see on social media and in cable news. But we saw something else in our airports. I talked to transportation security officers who told me that if it weren't for the stress of not getting a paycheck, they'd never been happier at work. Instead of grouching during the screening, people said thank you. They were kind. They offered help. Most people want to choose kindness. We pull together when things get bad. I saw it after 9/11, and I saw it during the shutdown. Americans like to feel solidarity, especially since it's something most of us are missing in our lives. And here we are with this White House, recognizing that the last thing we can do is take our rights, the rights we've gained, or our solidarity for granted. As Mother Jones told us, we will fight and win, fight and lose, but above all, we must fight. Our rights are never absolute. They exist because generations of workers died to give us these rights. They were shot down in Homestead, Pennsylvania, and in the hills of West Virginia. They were hanged for the Haymarket Affair in Chicago and beaten on an overpass near Detroit, all for taking a stand for the rights of working people. There were beatings at Stonewall and murders in San Francisco City Hall. And these activists thought it was important enough to stand up against all odds and put everything on the line to make it better for their families and for our families. And today, it's our turn. Corporate executives don't turn on us with guns and clubs and bombs today. They let their supporters in the Congress and in the state houses across the country do their dirty work. They use their lawyers to try to strip us of our rights. And as long as we believe that our issues are unique and social issues are not also economic issues, they will get away with it. More than 100 years ago, Frederick Douglass told us all we need to know today. He said the difference between the white slave and the black slave was this: the latter belonged to one slaveholder, and the former belonged to slaveholders collectively. Both were plundered, and by the same plunderers. The white laboring man was robbed by the slave system of the just results of his labor because he was flung into competition with a class of laborers who worked without wages. The slaveholders blinded them to this competition by keeping alive their prejudice against the slaves as men, not against them as slaves. Wall Street, billionaire financiers, and multinational corporations have worked hard to have us believe we are in competition with each other, to push us lower and lower using tactics of racism, sexism, ageism, and promoting fear in one another. But it's our turn to shape our labor movement. Unions in this country have led mobs against immigrants, and we have lifted up immigrants. We have written union constitutions that exclude African Americans, and yet Dr. King gave his life on a union picket line. We as a movement are not automatically on the right side. We have to choose to be, and we have to live that choice. And today, the choices haven't gotten any easier, they've only gotten harder. Our lives and our well-being are completely tied together with workers in Mexico and Canada, China, and Germany. Yet politicians in every country seek to divide us and pit us against each other. The energy sector employs millions of workers. Our communities depend on coal, oil, natural gas, yet carbon emissions threaten our own very civilization. We can fight climate change and create the good jobs with rights and benefits that we deserve. And that's why I support the Green New Deal. But we can only fight climate change if we stand together, if we listen and respect our brothers and sisters in the energy sector and demand the rich and powerful pay their share in the fight against climate change. And that we begin by honoring the promises we made to the people who have kept our cities lit and our homes warmed. Promises that they would have a pension and health care that they could count on when they retired. I learned the hard way at the bargaining table with some of the world's most powerful corporations, stacked even with the power of the bankruptcy court, that the solidarity and courage of working people is the greatest force for good in human history. And I also learned in some of those boardrooms when I had to talk with them that they do not have the corner on smarts. Wouldn't it be great if the social norm were people rising up in a general strike, if lawmakers didn't secure health care as a right, equal pay, affordable housing, fully funded public schools, voting rights, democracy free of corporate dollars, and jobs that provide bread and roses, too? So I believe strongly this is the country we can build together. We can do this together. Si se puede. Every race, gender, culture, and creed. Our American labor movement. Sometimes we fight by rallying, sometimes we fight by marching, sometimes we fight by voting, sometimes we fight by singing, sometimes we fight by striking. But above all, when we fight together. So look around the room. These are the people that you start with. And now say it with me. I've got your back. I've got your back. Now mean it. I've got your back. Don't forget it. I've got your back. We can do this, and I look forward to your questions.
Now we're going to open the floor up for questions, and I see one in the back.
Thank you for all your hard work over the years. My question has to do with the Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. What's the position of your union on what should be done going forward with that aircraft?
Good question. I have to write congressional testimony tomorrow on that very issue. Wish you were asking me that question on Friday. But So the 737 MAX is on the ground and should remain on the ground until there is not only a fix, but all the questions about how we got to this place are answered. So there are many questions about how this happened, and it is very clear that Boeing executives put dollars before safety. That's coming out more and more as we're discovering what went on in the original certification of the 737 MAX, which is, and let me just say, I want to talk about this from the perspective of credibility and the traveling public's confidence in being able to get back up in the air on the 737 MAX. I'm not going to pretend to be an engineer here or a pilot. But what we have seen over the last 20 years is that actually, as our politics have moved into the budgeting process, and there has been more and more emphasis on how are we going to pay for the things that really matter to us, not for the things that the owner class wants, like, you know, more and more tax breaks so they can put more and more in their pockets. As all of the political process has moved to this brinksmanship of determining how we're going to fund things, how we're going to prioritize things through the budgeting process, we have seen government budgets shrink and shrink and shrink. And so the resources to fund oversight by the government of safety programs, whether that's OSHA or the EPA or the FAA, has been diminished. And that has been a bit of a slow burn, and it has stemmed from a place of trying to choke out government programs altogether so that everything can become privatized, which also was very clear during the government shutdown was an intended purpose. The wall was not what it was about. It was really about making government not work. So that the American public would have a cry for the White House to fix that. They would accrue a ton of power in that process and would have been able to privatize many things like our transportation security, like our air traffic control system, for example. So what we have seen in aviation is that much of this oversight has been handed over to the manufacturers and to the airlines to sort of self-regulate and report back to the FAA what they're doing, but not direct oversight in the workplace, not even people to review this process who are paid for by the government. And so Boeing was able to hide from the FAA certain changes that it had made and was not clear with the pilots about the changes that they had made to counterbalance the more powerful engines in a different place on the aircraft. And there is a question fundamentally about whether or not the 737 MAX should actually be a 737 or if it should be another aircraft type altogether that would have a more rigorous certification process. So that question is out there. And because of the scrutiny around the FAA and Boeing, that question very much needs to be answered, and it is unclear what the answer is to that, but before they can put the 737 MAX back up in the air, that needs to be fully determined and explained. And the reason that it needs to be explained is because a lot of our ability to have reach with the rest of the world is because of the United States standing in aviation. Many other countries look to the United States for our certification process and will simply sort of take the FAA's word for it that something is safe. If we lose credibility that the FAA is actually performing their role as this oversight body and tending to give more power to the corporations who are driven by the bottom line, then we are in jeopardy of losing our standing in the world, and that may actually jeopardize our ability to fly to places around the world and to have agreements that allow us to have U.S. crews actually and U.S. jobs doing this work. Not to mention the fact that Boeing is an American company. The workers at Boeing have been hurt by this process and have been put into jeopardy because of the greedy decisions that were made in the boardroom. And that is unfair too. So we have to have a very conservative approach to the recertification of the 737 MAX, and we also have to analyze the process that led us to this problem, that led us to a place of Boeing, for example, identifying the fact that there was not that the disagree light was not coming on prior to either crash, the Lion Air or the Ethiopian crash, and deciding in 2017 that they were going to fit in that fix sometime in 2020 because that's what made sense on their balance sheet. So we have to answer a lot of questions here, and I think that the public also has to know that Boeing is taking ownership of the decisions that they made that were based in greed. They're taking ownership of the 346 lives that have been lost because of that. They're changing the way that they're doing business, and the FAA is seeing to it to review all of those procedures, determining whether or not the 737 MAX certification still may stand based on an open process to determine whether or not that was an accurate way to certify that aircraft, and then certify the fix that Boeing has in place. Check that with all of the other world authorities and make sure that everybody is on board with the process that we are taking so that when we decide to put that MAX back up on the air, we're not undercut again with our credibility for not just Boeing, but America. And then the MAX can get back up in the air. But until all of those things are done, it needs to stay on the ground.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for your very inspiring remarks. My name is Greg Bamber. I'm a university researcher in Australia and in the United Kingdom as well. And you would recall that Samuel Gompers was asked, what do workers want? And he said something like, more. I'd like to ask you to build on that answer, asking you if you were given a blank sheet of paper and you could design the perfect set of employment conditions for your members, what would be the priorities for the conditions that you would design as an enlightened union leader, please? Thank you.
Thank you. So fundamentally, and this is often skipped over because we sort of can take it for granted sometimes, but fundamentally, workers want to know that when they go to work, they're going to work in safe conditions and they're actually going to be able to go home to their families at night. Beyond that, there needs to be respect on the job, and I don't ever expect that management is going to give us respect. Okay? That respect is shown through pay that allows us to not only provide for the basic necessities in life for our families, housing, okay? Schooling, right? Clothing, and guess what? Vacations, okay? And there also has to be the ability for people to be able to speak up and be a part and take ownership of the product that they're helping create or the service that they're helping provide. And there has to be a vehicle, and that happens through unions in the workplace, that it is the people on the ground doing the work, understanding how what they're building works and will be beneficial to people, how people are going to use it, how people are going to receive the services that are being provided. And there has to be a means, and that is through unions, to be able to give that feedback and be a part of producing the goods and services that the company that they're working in creates. And so those things are important. And along with that, every worker, and what I'm really trying to describe, is that every worker is entitled to have dignity at work, right? So that only happens if we have labor rights. If federal workers had the right to strike and were not threatened with going to jail if they do, that government shutdown wouldn't have gone on for 5 minutes, and all of the rest of us would not have been in jeopardy. If workers have right in their workplace to speak up and say when something is not safe, then the public is not at risk either. If every single worker has rights to join a union, then we won't see this constant attempt by companies to have an arm's length from their workers and say, no, they're just contractors and I don't have any say. I feel for them. I'm a bleeding heart liberal, but I don't really have any say over what's happening to them with their pay and benefits or anything that's happening at work, because that's just a contractor that we work with. Bullshit. So there has to be the fundamental right for every worker, no matter what sector that they're working in, that they have the right to join a union, that they have a right to form that union, that they have the ability to negotiate for a union contract, and that will then provide the things that people really want in their lives.
Thank you so much for everything that you've shared so far. As you've kind of mentioned, there are a number of employers that you've mentioned, and one of the things that's really gaining traction in the 2020 debate is anti-monopoly work and things like that. And with airlines being one of the most consolidated industries in the world, and monopoly power being one of the big reasons that corporations and employers don't really see themselves as accountable in a real way to workers or to civil society. What relationship do you, if any, do you think that the labor movement has with a robust anti-monopoly, antitrust agenda for regulators and civil society?
Thank you. So I think that this is an important concept that we have to take on. And let me just say that, monopolies exist only so far. And then these big monopolies also then use this idea of contracted work, okay? So, for example, in the airline industry, we have aircraft that take off. Some are considered mainline aircraft, major jets, and some are considered regional jets, okay? Now, originally, these regional jets were commonly flying from locations that couldn't take the size of a bigger jet, okay? They were much smaller aircraft. The flight attendants and pilots and mechanics who were working there were all working in communities where the cost of living was lower. And there was a recognition that there were not as many bodies going onto the jets. There was maybe some recognition that maybe they're not able to make as much revenue as the larger airlines with the larger jets with more people on board, okay? But through the process of consolidation, United, American, Delta, they have gained extreme power, and also their boardroom and their management are further and further removed from the workers doing the work, right? And so what they do now is they make these regional airlines, who are their own businesses, bid for the work to do the regional flying, except that these regional jets have gotten bigger and are actually flying many times on the same routes as the mainline jets. So for example, between Chicago and National, you might have 20 flights a day. Half of them are regional jets, half of them are mainline jets, and just because it's a regional jet, pilots and flight attendants on that jet are making 45% less. Because those mainline carriers are the ones who are really in control of the revenue stream, and they have the regional carriers negotiate with those mainline monopolies to for the lowest fee for departure. So there's nothing these regional airlines can do to try to increase their revenue. They only do it through this contract that they negotiate with the mainline. And then the cost of that is passed on to the workers, right? So it is critically important that we're taking on the issue of that is turning into a global problem with multinational corporations who can also be far removed from the workers because they can say, well, I don't know what they're doing in that country, but we wouldn't do that in this country. And so it's fundamentally important that we take on this issue, because when there is too much power that goes to those corporations, and in conjunction with the other laws that we have in place, where money is such a huge influence in our politics, and where Wall Street has more and more control of the decisions in the boardroom, because That board answers to Wall Street. They don't answer to the people who are buying the goods and services or the employees who are making the value of that company. And so I'll give you one other example. In the last 2 years alone, Delta, American, United, Southwest gave $12 billion in stock buybacks. And yet, they had to cut an additional flight attendant off the plane because they promised Wall Street that they wouldn't increase labor costs. And as the contracts have been negotiated with pay increases, they didn't have anywhere else to take from except from bodies. So that passes the cost to the employees, the burden to the employees, and to the traveling public. So there's nothing about these monopolies, even though they would like to say, oh, our customers have access to this bigger network and have access to all these things because we're so big. No, they're totally removed from the customers, from the employees, and they don't have to answer to them because of how our laws work in conjunction with money in politics and with the ability for Wall Street to continue to take more and more of the revenue that our companies are creating. So it's fundamental, but I don't think it exists alone. I think it exists in conjunction with these other issues that we have to take on.
It was really refreshing to hear you talk about the interest that we have in common with workers around the world, especially in a time of rising nationalism, both here and abroad. And so I wondered if you could talk more about what you think that looks like. What are the opportunities? What do we need to do to build international solidarity?
Thank you. So, as we go more and more to a global economy, a lot of that is happening through trade agreements. And I'll tell you that in the fight against TPP, I sat in a boardroom with USTR and our labor secretary at the time. And they said, I don't know why the labor movement is against TPP. This has some of the best labor provisions of any trade deal we've ever negotiated. And this is the week after they found mass graves in Malaysia. And they wanted Malaysia to be a partner in TPP. There was just this one little problem, and that was that on states' determination of ranking in human trafficking, Malaysia was in a bad category, right? So I said, well, that's really interesting because you're going to maybe prove me wrong, but I think that next week the State Department is going to actually move Malaysia to a different tier so that they can still participate in TPP. And fundamental labor rights, I would think, would include the United States saying that we're not going to do business with people who are harbingers of slavery. And so I only say that to say that we have tremendous power as if we want to be a world leader in demanding that there are certain provisions that have to exist in order for us to do business with the rest of the world. And we see that right now in NAFTA. So in NAFTA 2.0, what is baked into the deal? What's baked into the deal is a huge giveaway to the pharmaceutical companies and a promise that after the fact we might negotiate some side letters on labor rights. None of these trade deals have done anything to make labor rights fundamental to the trade deal itself, and there is not a single case, including people being murdered and strung up, that has been actually tried, and there has been any enforcement on that. And if we have to compete with those kinds of labor standards around the world, we can't possibly compete. So we have to help workers in this country understand why the labor rights of workers in other countries actually matter. Because that is who we are competing with for work. And if these greedy corporations that continue to grow bigger and bigger and further away from workers and have more say over what's happening politically around the world are not held accountable to certain standards, they will go with the lowest common denominator, and the lowest common denominator is absolutely slavery. So I think that this has to be sort of Look at the Green New Deal resolution, for example. Okay? This is about avoiding climate catastrophe. But if you read that resolution, it is more about basic human rights and good jobs and good union jobs than anything else. And passing that resolution would be about the United States saying, fundamentally, these are the principles that are going to guide us. And if we want to change the conditions around the world, we need to set those clear principles, clear not only for the people who live in this country, but also as a beacon once again for the rest of the world. And so we have to start here. We have to start here at home. And we have to say that that is fundamental to anything that we do in any relation with any other country around the world. And then we have to make that the mission of all of our departments and agencies who interface on any level, on any issue at all, as we work in this global economy around the world.
Thanks so much for your comments. I'm with the Teamsters, so we of course mostly represent cargo pilots and mechanics, are our biggest groups in the airline sector. But wanted to raise a couple of questions. One, there's been a lot of press lately around really tough battles going on with mechanics at Southwest and American, and also with Teamster and Unite HRA members at Gate Gourmet. So given that, the mechanics fight is really around outsourcing. The Gate Gourmet fight is really around these really poverty wages at the airports, and a lot of instances of the company really skirting like security regulations and safety to just like get the food on the plane as quick as possible. Just curious to get your reaction on, what role you think the carriers can play in this. I mean, obviously with the mechanics issue, that's like direct, like bargaining with the mechanics and making decisions around outsourcing, but also now that we have, as was pointed out in the back of the room, these like mega carriers because of all of these mergers and acquisitions. What's your opinion on who's which one is doing the best job, who has the best labor relations, who is like doing terribly as they've merged all these corporate cultures over the years? So that may be a lot of questions, so feel free to just take on one or two of them.
Okay.
So first of all, I should just say that, work with a lot of different management, and I can tell you sort of like who in their heart is easier to reach. At the end of the day, I don't think any of that matters. It doesn't matter if they're a hard ass who doesn't give a shit about workers, or if they're somebody who says, like, I was out marching at the Women's March, but which is what one of them told me, and was supposed to be like, okay, you get a pass. I mean, at the end of the day, management is only going to do what we make them do. And so, I mean, and I will tell you, I mean, I definitely will give them a pat on the back anytime they do anything good. I mean, let's get them competing to the best standards. I'm not saying to give up on that. I'm just saying that the only reason that they will actually do anything that is worthwhile for workers is if we make them do it, or they understand that the threat is real, that we're going to make them do it, right? So that fundamentally, we just have to understand all the time. And in some cases, I actually like it when we get a jerk, because it's like easier to fight, right? So in terms of the mechanics, I'm glad that there is a light being shown on this, but almost all of our heavy maintenance is done outside of the United States already. Like, that just happened, you may think, in the dead of the night, but it happened really during a time when we were not awake, right? And when we were giving way to this idea that we should be lucky to have a job, and that my neighbor's issues don't have anything to do with my issues, and that if my neighbor has something better than I have, I should pull them down rather than asking for a hand up. And so all of a sudden, people are finding that we have common fights here. And we absolutely should be taking on this issue of maintenance, and we have a real window and opening to do that. The mechanics at American have a huge hill to climb, because what management at these airlines will say is, but this is the way it's done now. You can't fight the way that it's done now because everybody does it, right? Which is also why we have to be bold as a labor movement and say just because everybody does it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. So I think that is going to be a huge fight, but I think that the conditions in the country are primed for us to try to turn that around. In terms of the caterers, I mean, these were jobs that 30 years ago were airline jobs. And they were good, you know, middle class, I don't like using middle class, but they were good jobs where people could have a good life and provide for their families and actually think about their children doing better than them, right? And so those jobs were outsourced, and they're entirely outsourced. And now these companies compete to do this work for catering the airplanes. And what we've been doing is talking with flight attendants about these people who are virtually invisible to us, except for the truck drivers who come to load the food, about what's happening in the kitchens because it has a direct impact on what's happening to us. I mean, because of the conditions in these kitchens, we're getting unsafe food. And we're getting carts that are not swapped out because the workers are so pushed to move this stuff through the kitchens that they can't even walk 10 feet to get a cart that's working. They'd rather throw out their back and keep moving the carts because otherwise they may lose their job that they have as only a third of their income, and they have to do 2 others to make ends meet. So I actually think that in all of these issues, you are right in the way that you asked the question, and that is that the public is starting to wake up to our safety and security. And making these fights about the public good and why it matters to the public that we're taking on these fights is how we're going to win. And that is what the teachers have done. And frankly, that is what Unite Here members taking on Marriott did when they made their fight about one job should be enough, something that we can all identify with, right? So I think we're really ripe to take this on, but there is no airline that is going to take any sort of benevolent action to make this better.
I just wanted to say thank you for being an American labor leader that's not just willing to say the word strike, but is willing to say the words general strike. That's awesome and unfortunately really rare, and it's also notable that it was a woman who had to say that. In this landscape. So first of all, big fan. But the question I wanted to ask was, can you tell us a little bit more about the chaos tactic in terms of how that tactic was developed, the sort of the structures that you had to build to pull that off, and how you maintain that structure over the years? And are there any like limitations or sort of downsides to that tactic versus like a full-on majority strike?
I love talking about chaos. Okay. So, we formed Chaos to really fight back against the playbook that management had put together on strikes. And under the Railway Labor Act, we do have the ability to do intermittent strikes, which is not the case under the NLRA. Okay, but this was something that we found that no one was using in aviation, and we decided to use it. So what we announced was that we were going to strike without warning, and it could be a single flight, it could be a whole city, it could be actually the entire system for an hour, but there would be no warning. Now, that's great for making management go crazy, but the difficult part about it is that actually it's a harder task to build solidarity, because when you're telling the workers, we may only ask 3 of you to strike, they're all thinking it's me, right? And they're all thinking that means I'm basically standing alone. So fundamentally, a strike is a tactic, solidarity is the power, right? And I'll get back to the specifics of chaos in a second, but chaos in this way is no different than any other strike. You have to start with defining what's at stake. And that has to come from the ranks too, okay? So this is all about like, what are we fighting for? And you have to engage the members in that process. And this is part of the beginning process of organizing for a strike. And then you have to see, what are you willing to do to fight for those things? Because fundamentally, if workers are not willing to take the steps to fight those issues, then you have to find another way as a labor leader to try to get results. And this was a really difficult lesson that I had to learn at the beginning of the United Airlines bankruptcy, when what we had to do was to keep the flight attendants' comments from going public, because they were all saying, "Give them everything, just save my job!" And I was like, "Shut up!" So I mean, that exists, right? I mean, I'm sure that you've all seen it, right? That, people who are afraid of their own shadow, and sometimes for good reason, But you really, it's so important to find what's at stake, define what we're willing to do to fix it, and then have everyone sign up for that. So for chaos, we had to tell people, look, this is in the law. It's never been tested before. We think it's going to work, so sign up. And where is this videotape going? Okay, well, let's just say that in chaos, one thing you shouldn't do is tell someone the day before they're going to strike that they're going to strike, but don't tell anyone. When it's a surprise strike, you really should only tell the strikers no more than an hour before they're going to do it. But the great thing about chaos that we found is that management did figure out how to bust unions in a strike. A traditional strike, it's like, the same thing every time. The workers all go out, and management starts figuring out how to get more and more scabs to cross the picket line, how to get replacement workers, and the media started reporting on this. I mean, there was the mechanics strike at Northwest Airlines in, I think it was 2004. If you saw the reporting from that strike, the very first sentence on the very first day was, "We wonder how long the mechanics are going to hold out, or how many are going to start crossing the picket line because they need to provide for their families." Okay? So the other thing that we found with chaos that was so great was it wasn't just about the action itself. It was about the fact that we started talking about the creativity of this. And we even said, we may strike in the middle of a flight. Now, we can't do that. But management cleared out all of the managers from corporate headquarters, literally everyone except for the C-suite officers, and made them go out and fly on the planes for 2 months because they thought we may strike in the middle of a flight. Meanwhile, they're having to spend all this time with the flight attendants, and they couldn't even get the rules that were in our contract because they were working these managers hard to get on every flight. And so they were going back to company headquarters saying, you really should give them a better contract. They have a really hard job. So there's all these things that you can do when you're not confined by the rule book, right? And the other thing that I find is that in these corporate structures, of course, it's very top-down, and it's very rule-based within their corporate structures, and they don't get to really ask questions or anything, so they're not really able to easily change what they're doing. And they've gotten really lazy on union busting because they've done such a good job of stamping unions out too. So they don't know how to respond to strikes right now. They don't know how to really do any good union busting. I mean, nobody knows how to do it. It's hilarious if you look. It's the same lines that they use everywhere. It doesn't matter what industry it is. Up to and including Delta Airlines saying you'd rather play video games than have a union contract. And so chaos is amazing because it just frees the workers. And it is really difficult to build solidarity around that, but it is fundamental just like anything else. And what we had to do was we had to have every single worker sign up and say, when I'm called, I will go, right? And so we did that, and during the 8 months that we were in the period of chaos, or after the period of self-help, management, of course, one of the things that they did was they made it an open shop, and only 10 of the flight attendants opted out of the union. And so we were able to demonstrate that solidarity. But I should also give a huge shout out to Jobs with Justice. because another thing that we did during that time was we would have these huge events. And we actually had several people from Jobs with Justice get arrested outside of company headquarters. And the flight attendants got so excited that they almost tipped over a bus with scabs in it who were going to get trained. But it challenges all these notions about who the workers are and what they can do and what sort of power they have to change their own situation. And, getting people arrested at a flight attendant rally, that's like not what anyone would think, One of my attorneys said flight attendants should spit on passengers. And I'm like, okay, now you've gone too far. But it just, it frees you up to be able to do anything. Another thing that we did was we had flight attendants sign a petition about the executive bonuses that had been taken during bankruptcy. And it was, give the money back. And so one of the board members at United was the dean of Kellogg Business School. So we went over and took over his classroom, unannounced. A classroom full of MBA students. And we had flight attendants in chaos t-shirts who were like centurions down the auditorium side steps. All the students were in there. And I came in with the petitions and slammed it down on the lectern and said, all of you need to think about this when you go into business and you try to screw your workers. And it was great. And it's like, it's empowering for the workers. First, the ones who signed the petition feel ownership of that, and they feel some power. And, we're able to do all these things that got incredible press, too. That was extraordinary. And then it becomes a tactic that you can actually use even when you don't have that solidarity. So once we had established chaos and we had the ruling from the court that it was legal, and by the way, management was so frazzled by the point we got that court ruling, and they had to restore these workers that they had replaced and give them back pay, that they wanted to settle the contract over fax machine that night. And we said, well, don't you want to meet? I mean, we've been at this for a long time. Don't you want to talk about the language? Because they just wanted to take another contract from the industry and just give it to them so they wouldn't even have to meet with us. Well, the type of flying that they did applied to this one little provision in the contract that they didn't really look at. And after we asked them several times, did they not want to meet? No, we're going to sign it tonight over fax machine. A week later, they came back and they said, but we didn't know about this one provision, and they don't use it at the other airline except like one flight a year, but this applies to 60% of our flying, and it means that the flight attendants are going to get a 60% raise. And we said, you didn't want to meet? So overnight, the flight attendants got a 60% raise. But anyway, after we had established that this was legal, this was a tactic we could use, we had another fight at AirTran, and there, really, we only had about 10% support of the flight attendants. And so we were kind of trying to bluff our way to an agreement, right? And we're in negotiations sort of at the end, and the CEO comes and he says to our president at AirTran, he says, Bill, our managers have been out there counting, and they only count about 10% of the flight attendants who have their union pin on. So we know you don't have the support. And Bill leans in and he says, Ted, that's because we told them to take it off. This is chaos. And they're like, oh shit. Like, I mean, you just control everything with chaos. So, you can be really creative. You got to look at the law and figure that out. But every union should be free to be creative, because what we really need to know is that they really don't know how to operate outside of their very heavy-handed set of rules that they work by. And if you do something creative and help workers feel their power along the way, you can really put them, off center and use that to your advantage. And frankly, all of the things that I had learned during chaos absolutely came into what I did during the shutdown. So I should just note that, we were at an airline conference early in January, and I'm at this conference with manufacturers and the airlines and airports and other unions. And everyone was talking about the shutdown and how bad it was. So in aviation, we understood that, where the rest of the American public maybe didn't, right? And so everybody's talking about it, and we never agree on anything. And so I happened to be on the leadership panel, and I said, you guys, you realize we can end the shutdown. This room can end the shutdown. And they all kind of go, huh? Like, they don't know what kind of power they have. That's the other thing, too. And so from that, at least, we got an industry letter that defined all the problems with the shutdown. And so the industry was totally united, right? Separately, I got that question about what are the pilots willing to do, right? Now, I knew the pilots weren't ready to stand up and say, we're going out. I knew that. But I also knew that they weren't going to undercut me. Because it's not as if our union was out standing alone. It's not as if I was standing alone. J. David Cox of AFGE was over getting arrested at Mitch McConnell's office, and Paul Rinaldi from the air traffic controllers and Trish Gilbert were out on every program they could get in on, talking about what the air traffic controllers do and why it mattered to safety and security, and helping to lay that line. And then we were coordinating together, and we were talking about what we needed to do to spread that message. And so it was out of a common understanding about the safety and security and building that behind the scenes, just like, these teacher strikes, everybody thinks like all of a sudden a spark was lit and everybody in West Virginia went out. No, this had been years and years of building this, and this had been inspiration of the years and years that were built in Chicago in 2012, right? So there was a lot of work that was done behind the scenes to understand where everyone in the community stood. And from that then, really understanding that solidarity, just like with chaos and what we had to do at Alaska when we first ran chaos, and we had to understand that every single flight attendant was saying, yes, if I'm called, I'm going to go. That we could then do anything with that. So as 10 air traffic controllers said, I can't go on anymore, right? I put out a press release, and LaGuardia shut down. I put out a press release that said, Mitch McConnell, do we have your attention now? As if this was something planned. It wasn't. These people couldn't go to work anymore. But what sort of message did we send after we had said that we were going to perform a general strike, and we were out there saying very clearly about the action that we would take? So when you have that solidarity built up and you are clear about that, and you've done the work in the community to know that the community is behind you, you still have to have a leader who is setting the demands, right? And you can do that when you've done that foundational work. And the principles of chaos free you to be able to use whatever tactics you think are going to get the attention on the issues that matter, on what's at stake, and then what we're willing to do to fix it.
Thank you. We're actually at time right now, so everyone give Sara Nelson a hand.